All right. Now that we have gotten started with the recording, I'd like to call the August 23rd, 2022 meeting of the Planning Board to order, please. There is somebody with no mute on and iPhone. Oh, beautiful. Thank you. So I'd like to call the meeting to order, please. Karen, could you call the roll?
Bob Doherty, absent. Jim Callahan,
Here.
Kevin Donovan.
Here.
David Edmonds,
Here.
Carolyn Turner. Here. Chair Claudia Bogan.
Here. All right, first item on the agenda, I'm actually going to call two items together. I'm going to call subdivision approval not required plans 215 New Boston / 225 Merrimack Street. I'm going to call that together with the continuance of a public hearing, special permit site plan review, application to authorize 33,514 square feet of light manufacturing space within a two-story 133,738 square foot building at 216 New Boston Street.
Attorney Tarby, do you want to take the explanation or shall I?
Go ahead, Tina.
Sure. Absolutely. So we have two items, as the chair mentioned. The first is an A&R plan that has been filed in order to reconfigure lot lines between the two parcels that were mentioned. The reconfiguration will be necessary to accommodate the two buildings and the parking that the petitioner hopes to be able to build if he's able to obtain special permits as described in the special permit petition that you mentioned. The staff has reviewed the A&R. It meets all the plans requirement, all of the board's requirements for A&R plans, with one exception. The locus is drawn at a different scale than the board typically requires, but given the size of the parcels, it's at least staff's opinion that the scale that was provided would actually, in this case, be superior to the one you typically require. More importantly, perhaps of anything, the lots as reconfigured meet the frontage requirements for zoning. So staff recommends that you vote to endorse that plan as one not requiring approval under the subdivision control law. If you do, we will invite the chair, the vice chair in to endorse the plan absent a meeting in person to do that. Secondarily, there is a request on the table to continue the public hearing on the special permit site plan review application for 216 New Boston, 225 Merrimack. You'll recall that we started the hearing last month and determined that a number of different subjects needed a required peer review. It was recommended by both DPW and engineering. Consultants, in fact, have been hired on all three fronts. Some of the peer reviews have been completed and provided to the applicant and the city. There are others that are still not yet finalized to the best of my knowledge. So for that reason, Attorney Tarby has requested on their behalf that we continue the public hearing to your meeting on September 13th. That will hopefully allow enough time for those reviews to be completed and for the petitioner's consultants to have conversations with the city and its peer reviewers and come to resolution, hopefully, on any issues or questions that they have.
Okay, Tina, thank you. So I called both things together, the continuance of the public hearing and the subdivision approval not required plan. So I'd ask Attorney Tarby, we can certainly, based on the planning board director's recommendation, take action on the A&R tonight. The reason I ask you the question is there, obviously the A&R goes together with the other item that I've called special permit site plan review. So we can take action on the A&R tonight. It sounds like we will not be taking action on the special permit / site plan review. Under those circumstances, do you wish us to go forward on the A&R plan tonight as representing the petitioner?
Yes, please.
All right. Well, since that is not a public hearing requirement And having heard the planning board director's recommendation, does any board member have any questions, comments, or concerns regarding the A&R plan?
I make a motion to approve the A&R plan.
Motion by David to approve the A&R plan as submitted as not requiring subdivision approval. And is there a second?
Second.
Second by Carolyn. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, I would ask Karen for a roll call vote, please.
Jim Callahan,
Aye.
Kevin Donovan, Dave Edmonds,
Aye.
Carolyn Turner,
Aye.
Chair Claudia Bolgan.
Aye, that's 5 in favor, none opposed. That motion carries. All right, and with respect to the other matter that I've called the continuance of the public hearing, I can certainly open the public hearing for any public comment that any member of the public wishes to put into the record tonight. So my understanding is that there will likely not be a further presentation tonight. That is the part that Attorney Tarby is requesting to continue. Is that right, Tina?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. So at this time, I would invite any member of the public who wishes to speak to use the raise hand function that Tina will explain to let us know that you would like to speak on this matter.
So if you have a comment you'd like to make, please hover your cursor over the bottom of the screen. You'll see a tab that says reactions. If you click on that, you will see a raise hand button. If you click on that, I'll be able to tell that you would like to address the board.
And what about the telephone people, Tina?
Oh, my. Well, I guess what I would ask on that one, just to be careful, if anybody on the telephone, I don't know, David.
Well, since there appear to be, if I'm right, 2 people on the telephone.
There are.
If the raise hand function is unavailable to the audience participants who are on the telephone, if they could give us a verbal cue that they would like to speak, that would work too. All right, so I don't hear a verbal cue and I do not see any hands raised. So at this point, I would entertain a motion by a board member to continue this matter to our next meeting, which would be September 13th, and that would be at 7:00 p.m.
So moved.
Motion by David. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Carolyn. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, I would ask Karen for a roll call vote, please.
Jim Callahan,
Aye.
Kevin Donovan,
Aye.
David Edmonds,
Aye.
Carolyn Turner,
Aye.
Chair Claudia Bolgan.
Aye. That is 5 in favor, none opposed. That motion carries. The matter stands continued to our next meeting on September 13th at 7:00 p.m. Tina, have we decided whether that is a virtual meeting or an in-person meeting at this point in time?
We have not.
All right, we will likely take that matter up at the end of the meeting and then it will be posted accordingly. Awesome. All right, thank you very much. Next on the agenda under public hearings is public hearing proposed zoning amendment to amend the City of Woburn zoning ordinance by adding a new section 32 entitled Life Sciences and Business Mixed Use Overlay District, the LBOD, and B, amend the Woburn zoning map to overlay the new LBOD district onto the parcels shown on Woburn Assessor's maps as map 29, block 1, lot 1, map 29, block 1, lot 2, map 29, block 1, lot 3, map 29, block 1, lot 4, and map 29, block 1, lot 5. Tina, do we have, who is the petitioner?
The petitioner is represented by Attorney Joseph Tarby.
Excellent. Attorney Tarby, welcome.
Yes, thank you. Tina, can you share the screen with that team?
I have, with the gentleman you indicated earlier. There you go.
Yes, okay. So I represent TDC Development Group LLC, which is a subsidiary of the Davis Companies of 125 High Street in Boston. was the applicant on both of the petitions. We have a full team here this evening. In the event that you have questions on the proposed project that would come as a result of the adoption of the zoning amendments. With me this evening is Michael Cantalupa, who's the Chief Development Officer for the Davis Companies, Christopher Mora, Vice President of Development for the Davis Companies, Tim Williams of Allen and Major, the Civil Engineer, Scott Thornton of Vanasson Associates, the Traffic Engineer, and Dr. Antonia Puglisi of Safety Partners. One of our other consultants, Joshua Philbrook of DENS Facility Services, could not make it this evening. So in connection with this hearing, we have submitted the following. One, a comparison of the LBOD that was filed in September of 2021 with the one that was filed in July of 2021. We submitted a copy of a memorandum that was dated June 28, 2022, that was prepared at the request of Councilor Joseph Demers for the final neighborhood meeting that we had on June 28th, prior to the filing of the LBOD, which outlined in detail the extensive permitting process that's set forth in the LBOD. That was passed out to all of the attendees that came to that meeting. We'll provide copies to the city council as well as the planning board. We've also submitted a copy of the PowerPoint presentation that we're presenting this evening. So what I'd like to do at this time is turn it over to Chris Mora, Vice President of Development for the Davis Companies, who will provide you with a overview of the Davis Companies and a summary of the project. So Chris.
Yes, thank you, Joe. Good evening, members of the Woburn Planning Board. Thank you for hearing us out on this exciting project for us, potential project, I should say. Just a little bit about the Davis Companies. Was founded in 1976 by John Davis. And a lot of these projects should be familiar to you. And what you have on the screen, it's an example of the types of products that we like, that we focus over the past, spanning from industrial, life science, residential, and other commercial type of real estate development. A couple of projects that we are very proud of that are very much relevant to the presentation tonight. We do have some life science experience, more recently with 35 Cambridge Park Drive in Cambridge, and a project that we're currently working in Watertown at 66 Galen Street. We've also done quite a bit of industrial, some examples of projects on the screen. I myself, I'm involved in the Boston Market Terminal project, and that one is one that's special, as we tend to want to partner with municipalities, with cities, to address challenging problems that they may have. On that one in particular, we have addressed, as part of the project, a major drainage infrastructure issue that the city of Everett had. There is a component of drainage on the proposal here for this project in Woburn. So we certainly have the expertise. And I will say about Davis, we tend to focus on markets that are driven by intellectual capital, innovations, and growth industries. And we certainly believe the reason why we're here in front of you tonight, we certainly believe Woburn fits that profile for the type of market that we like to do development projects on. So next slide, please. So just as Joe said, a quick project summary. The site in question, it's about a 13.5 acre development site adjacent to the Showcase Cinema. I'll show an image on the next slide just to refresh your memory. We're proposing to develop 2 buildings to operate in advanced or light manufacturing, or as an alternative use, life science and pharmaceutical as well. Each structure They're identical, about 80,000 square foot in footprint with an approximate 20,000 square foot mezzanine level. As I said, the project includes the rehabilitation of an existing stormwater detention system that has fallen into disrepair. And it provides, we believe, significant new opportunities for residents of Woburn and neighboring communities for the types of employment that this project brings to the community. Next slide, please. Here's an image of the parcel. The 13.5 acres is the site adjacent to the cinema, which is currently mostly an underutilized parking lot. And with that, I will give it back to Joe, who's going to talk a little bit about the zoning amendment history on this parcel.
Joe, you're muted.
Okay, sorry about that. The original LBOD petition was filed last September 2021. Public hearings before the city council, the planning board, and we ended up withdrawing it in December of 2021 after hearing concerns by planning board councilors and the neighbors. We subsequently made revisions over the winter. Had a rough draft in April of 2022, and then we held 2 informal neighborhood meetings to discuss the changes to the petition. One was on June 8th, one was on June 28th. In addition, Councilor Demers held his own meeting at the Woburn Public Library. So there were three meetings with the residents to review the proposed petition. We subsequently refiled the petition on July 7th. Last week, on August 16th, there was a public hearing held before the city council. At the conclusion of the public hearing, across the board, the city council was very complimentary to the Davis team for addressing the concerns, listening to the residents, listening to the council, listening to the planning board members, and referred the matter off to the ordinance committee and further continued the public hearing to September 20th. We still need to address some of the concerns that were raised, but generally it was a good public hearing. So before you, there were 2 petitions. One is to amend the zoning ordinance to add section 32, which is the Life Sciences and Business Overlay District. The second petition is to amend the zoning map to include the 4 parcels of land that were read at the beginning of the hearing into the LBOD. Those properties being the Showcase Cinema property containing 10.88 acres, the vacant parking lot, and the one that the applicant has under agreement with National Amusements, which contains 13.49 acres. That Middlesex Canal Park Road, which is a separate land court lot at 1.09 acres, and then the hotel property at 7.5 acres. So the total amount of land to be included in the LBOD is approximately 32.96 acres. As I said, my client has entered into an agreement with National Amusements to purchase the property subject to the zoning amendments being adopted and the subsequent special permit being issued. So what I'd like to do right now, Teresa, if you go to the next slide, I'd like to provide you with a overview and highlight of the changes that we made to the petition. We did provide you with a sort of a highlighted version for you to see the difference in some of the different sections of the ordinance. But the primary focus of the changes focuses the LBOD on advanced light manufacturing, research and development. In addition, as was suggested by the planning director during the 2021 review, that the LBOT at that time didn't contain any definitions of what we were looking to do. So since that time, Teresa, if you can go to the next slide, that would be good. And so this, just to stop for 1 second, this red outline gives you the area that's included in the LBOT. The first time around, and it was actually a mistake, the lower portion underneath the red was included. This shows you what's actually included, the 4 parcels that I just talked about. So we can go to the next slide, Teresa. Okay, so these are the highlights. As I indicated, it was suggested to us by the planning director that we really need to include definitions. So we've included with this version, definition of advanced light manufacturing. And we've highlighted some of the key language in the definition: hand labor, quiet machinery, free from neighborhood disturbing agents, life science, which is research, development, manufacture in the fields of life science, biotechnology, medical, pharmaceutical, environmental science, comparative medicine, apparatus, machines, and devices for pharmaceuticals and biomedical technologies. In addition, we've replaced the high hazard use definition with group H-2 and group H-3 uses that are accessory and limited only, okay, to life science, laboratory, advanced light manufacturing, and research and development uses. All is defined in the International Building Code and limited to 10% of the gross floor area of a floor in a building. Now, the restriction of potential biomedical facilities to Bio 11.1 and Bio 11.2, as defined in the National Health Institute. This restriction is also consistent with Section 2-223A of the Woburn Municipal Code, which are the city's regulations for the Biomedical Oversight Committee. Only BL1 and BL2 uses are allowed. In addition,
Excuse me, Joe, I'm sorry. There is somebody who does not have a mute on, and I'm trying to figure out who it is. It might be Lynn Blanchard, or let me take a look.
I got it.
If you got it, thank you. All right, Joe, please go right ahead.
okay, so the LBOT is only allowing BL1 and BL2 uses, which is consistent with the Woburn Municipal Code and oversight by the Biomedical Oversight Committee. In addition, that oversight committee is a separate, but yet another layer of review and protection to the city of Woburn for any proposed BL1 and BL2 uses. A separate permit under the municipal code is required from the Biomedical Oversight Committee. And as of today, that committee has issued 54 permits for life science, manufacturing, and lab uses in the city of Woburn, all over different parts of the city. Fourth point I'd like to make is that, as you can see from the memo that I provided, that the city council may impose reasonable and necessary conditions on the buildings to safeguard the surrounding area from any impacts of a proposed use. That's all set forth in the memo. In addition, as you'll see, the planning board does have a role in this process. As with the T-Board, the planning board will hold a public hearing on this, and they will take testimony, provide input, and then make a recommendation to the city council. As you'll see further on in our presentation, the minimum required setback has been increased from 125 feet to 200 feet, and significantly further in different areas of the property. It's a funny shaped property, and it sort of bends in the middle, and that's where we get the 200 feet. We're actually, as you'll see, 215 feet away, but until we have the lot line surveyed, we proposed 200 feet. We also removed the term mixed use from the life science business section name. And then, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, there is no high hazard use that's a primary use under the LBOD. The group H2 and the group H3 uses will be accessory, as I said, and limited to life science, lab, advanced light manufacturing, research and development uses, limited to 10% of the gross floor area of a floor. This revision was made in response to feedback we heard from some of the area residents, city council members, so that the city can be more comfortable with the type of tenants that Mr. Cantalupa has described throughout the process that would be the ones to occupy the proposed development. So at this time, what I'd like to do is turn it back to Chris, and he will run through a series of questions that we heard from the neighbors at the various meetings that we had. Some of them I've already addressed. Others Chris will address right now. So Chris.
Sure. So as Joe said, we met twice with the neighbors in June, and what you see on the screen is the questions basically that we received in those two meetings. Questions 1 through 10, I'm going to address in the next few slides. Questions 11, 12, and 13, Joe just covered in his few slides that he just did. And questions 14 and 15, we do have, as Joe said, we had intended to have two experts here to help us answer these questions, but we do have Antonia that's going to address in her presentation to the board. So with that, Taribi, if I can get the next slide. So the setback, as Joe indicated in his slide, we're now proposing to make the minimum setback 200 feet from the closest residential abutting neighborhood. As you can see on the screen, initially when we came before you, our proposal was 125 feet. We did have the buildings configured on the left side of the screen, if you will. Actually, to her credit, it was a neighbor that, as one of the community meetings pointed out, if we had considered perhaps swapping the location of the buildings with the parking lot and thus increasing that setback. You can see the result of that on the right-hand side of the screen. And as you can see, 215 is the minimum that we're measuring right now. It actually increases for some of the other abutting properties. That 215 is the minimum. We're proposing 200. As Joe said, we're going to have to go eventually through a final site plan design approval. So we want to still maintain a little bit of flexibility as we optimize the layout of those buildings. And something that came out of the discussion with the neighbors as well was if we had the ability to increase the buffer in between the property and the proposed buildings. So as you can see here on the right-hand side, we're proposing to have a buffer constituted primarily of evergreen landscaping, just so that we can make sure there is sort of like a screen for those properties at all times of the year. So if I can get the next slide. Parking and traffic. We are clarifying that the only entrance that we're going to have to this property is from Middlesex Canal Park Drive. There is no other entrance or exit allowed. We're not going to do any subgrade parking. that is not in the planning for the facility. We are currently hitting a 2.5 per thousand parking ratio on just surface parking alone. And we think that's more than sufficient for the type of use that we want here. A full traffic study is going to be submitted as part of the final special permit application, and it's going to be in front of you for review at some point in the future. And we've also had discussions with some of the neighbors on, and we are proposing to install signage on True Place to prevent any accidental right-hand turns that appear to happen every now and then into True Place. That's a dead-end street. And as we understand, there are some issues there and with safety and the likes, that large vehicles make their way into down True Place, and then they don't have an easy way to actually turn around. So we propose to work with the city to eventually install some adequate signage that makes it clear that's not the way down to the hotel or the cinema site. Next slide, please. With regards to the building, we're proposing that the rooftop structures, obviously we haven't designed these buildings, but we are proposing that we would have up to 25% of height for 60% of the footprint of the building, obviously for a penthouse-like structure, and up to an additional 10 feet for between 5 and 7% of the rooftop structure for additional mechanical support. We have seen in some of these facilities, you have a penthouse and some of the equipment ends up being a lot taller than the penthouse itself. So that's why that provision it's in place. We are not planning to remove the stockade fencing that surrounds the property on the western side. You can see an aerial, or rather a drone shot of that fencing on the left-hand side of the screen. And as I said earlier, we would like to increase the buffering between the property and the surrounding residential neighborhood. We are committing to rehabilitate and restore the existing drainage system that ties this parking lot into the retention ponds just south of it. It's, as we understand, it's a clear state of disrepair and in need of a complete rehabilitation. And as far as lighting, we are committing to have a dark lighting that to prevent flooding into the adjacent residential neighborhood. So Taribi, if you can go back to the slide. I don't know what happened here. Apologize for this. Taribi, can you go back to this slideshow?
Can't you see my screen?
Yeah, just go back to the slideshow. It got kicked out of slideshow.
Oh, okay. Hold on. Let me do, All right, what do you see now?
Yeah, you're good.
Here we go.
Good. All right, bye-bye.
So if you can go to the next slide, Taribi. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Antonia Pugliese, who's going to go a little bit into explaining some of the safety associated with this type of facility. As we mentioned earlier, Josh, who has been working with our team, is unable to make it tonight. So Dr. Antonia is going to attempt to cover his slides as well. So, Antonia.
Great, thank you. All right, so I'm going to give you a bit of a safety program overview and just talk about the safety side of what would happen once there are tenants for this building. So the safety discussions don't stop at the point where the building gets built. There's a lot that the companies that come in would then be responsible for. So we are seeing more and more of these sort of situations where you have either mixed use biotech spaces or just biotech spaces that are very near residential areas. And this has been happening an increasing amount, but it's the same as any company that is working in this kind of space. They would need to have an EHS program. So that stands for Environmental Health and Safety. And they would either have an in-house person, someone who's dedicated to that, or a team of people who are dedicated to the safety program for that company, or they would bring out outside expertise like a consultant. And that's actually what I do most of the time, is that I provide these safety consulting services for companies that are doing biotech type work. If you think about what the point of their safety program is, the primary concern from the company's standpoint, if we could just go back, is usually to protect the worker. So if you think about the fact that the workers are just the closest ones to the materials that are being used and any potential hazards or risks that they have to handle, it's very, very important that they be properly protected. And as a fringe benefit of that, keeping all those materials well contained means that you're also protecting the environment and the public who would be further out from the immediate work. There are a lot of permitting requirements. I spend a lot of my time getting permits for various companies and helping them fill out all of that paperwork. And it's really important that that company be compliant with the regulations at all levels. So that would be federal, state, and local regulations. So everything about this biomedical research is very tightly regulated. And you can see from the materials that are going into the facility to how they are used in the facility, that they're being safely used and safely handled and safely stored, very important. And then also everything that leaves the facility has to do so safely. The products have to be exactly what they're supposed to be, and the waste has to be properly disposed of. So the whole process falls under that environmental health and safety umbrella. Next slide. So talking about manufacturing, this light manufacturing, biomedical manufacturing, I was actually really excited to hear that the Davis Company is looking to get tenants in that would be CGMP. That stands for Current Good Manufacturing Practice. I didn't mention, this is incidental to tonight. I am here to represent Safety Partners. I do actually live on True Place, the funny dead end street that's right near this area. So I was really excited to hear that they were going to be CGMP facilities, because that is like the best of safety regulations. It's actually an FDA standard. It's about making sure that the material, the products that are being produced in these manufacturing suites are the best and exactly what they're supposed to be. But that does mean that the companies need to proactively conform with the latest regulations, have state-of-the-art technology, and really make the best products. So if you are working under CGMP, to make sure that you have the proper quality and safety of the products, everything that gets done is operated, governed by standard operating procedures. So that's SOPs. Basically, every procedure that's going to happen is exactly spelled out and written down. You're not going to have people making things up on the fly or inventing new ways to do things. They have to very rigorously self-govern themselves and make sure everything that they're doing is perfect to try and avoid mistakes. Mistakes are very expensive if you have to throw out a whole batch of very expensive product that you're manufacturing. So they want to be really careful about that. Quality control is incredibly important. The equipment has to be in really good condition, rigorous maintenance schedules and calibration schedules, and records are mandatory and meticulous and subject to inspection at random. So they have to be very, very careful about that record keeping as well. So this is basically the most highly regulated type of work in this area that you might be doing. And other labs that are just doing research might be working with very similar materials, but they wouldn't be held to this incredibly high standard of the manufacturing CGMP. Next slide. Now I'm going to talk about things that are a little more universal, but would still apply in these situations. So you would need some kind of chemical hygiene program as long as any chemicals are being used. This is really focused on making sure you properly store the chemicals and that there is no risk of exposures. Again, mostly thinking about exposure excuse me, exposure of the employees, because they're the ones right there working with the chemicals, but that also has benefits to everyone further out. And there was a lot of question about what chemicals a company like this would have. In a manufacturing setting, the most significant volumes of chemicals we would be talking about are going to be disinfectants, because again, it's that focus on cleanliness, that focus on very careful operations and making sure the product is exactly right and exactly clean means that you need to be disinfecting things all the time in this sort of setting. So those disinfectants could include alcohols, and because alcohol is flammable, that's something that you need to be careful with. Could include bleach, which is a corrosive, or hydrogen peroxide based disinfectants, which are also corrosive, and phenolic cleaners or disinfectants. Some of these are very much just household products that you might have for cleaning. The phenolic cleaners are a little more specific, but the hospitals use a lot of phenolic cleaners, even if you don't use them in your house. That's the kind of material that we're talking about. And in terms of how the risks actually get mitigated for working with these chemicals, a hazard communication program is mandatory. So employees must always know and have available to them all the details about the chemical that they're working with, so we can make sure they know exactly how they're supposed to be using it and handling it and storing it. Safety controls are in place when an employee is working with chemicals. So personal protective equipment is PPE. That means that they are wearing something that protects them, or working in a fume hood that will protect them from any potential exposure. Materials have to be properly stored. So thinking about alcohols, if you have alcohol on site because you need it for disinfection, we want to make sure that it's safe if there were to be a fire. So storing that alcohol in flammable cabinets, separating incompatible chemicals so that you don't have any cross reactions, very important aspects of a safety program. And then of course, you can't just have these chemicals in a facility. You need some oversight from the fire department. So they would issue flammable storage and use permits, as well as if there's a reason for a hazardous material processes permit, that's something that the fire department also issues. And then in terms of waste, any chemical waste that is being generated, it has to be very, very carefully disposed of. So a licensed waste hauler would be contracted, and there would be EPA and Massachusetts DEP oversight of that waste that is removed by that licensed waste hauler. Next slide. That was all about chemical hygiene. I wanted to touch for a second on biosafety, because there's also the potential for biological materials to be used in these facilities. You already heard that these spaces would be limited to biosafety level 1 or biosafety level 2. But in case you're not especially familiar with what that means, I wanted to talk about risk groups, because the risk group that a biological material falls into usually determines what biosafety level it needs to be handled at. So limiting to BL1 or BL2 means you would also be limiting to risk group 1 and 2. And so you can see in these definitions, risk group 1 is not associated with disease in healthy adult humans and has low community risk as well as low risk to the workers. So an example of that would be Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which is just brewing yeast. It's the yeast that makes beer, so pretty safe to be around. And then risk group 2 is materials that may be associated with the disease, but it's rarely serious, and there are usually preventative and therapeutic interventions for those risk group 2 materials. So these again have low community risk, they have moderate worker risk, and so if a company is working with risk group 2 materials, they do need to have some safety procedures in place to protect those workers, but there isn't a significant risk of exposure to the community. And so my example, just sticking with yeast, would be Candida albicans. That's something you may have heard of people being sick. It's a opportunistic pathogen of humans. So that gets categorized as risk group 2. It's a bit more dangerous than just brewing yeast, but still not a especially dangerous material to work with as long as you're doing it carefully. And then risk group 3 and 4, those are much more serious materials. So anything that's associated with serious or lethal human disease or likely to cause serious or lethal human disease. And to be really clear about that, there would not be any risk group 3 or 4 materials being used in these facilities. Next slide. So just a few more general safety notes. I've talked about chemical hygiene, I've talked about biosafety. There's other safety aspects to consider. So you need to have an emergency action plan or contingency plan for the company, and employees have to be trained on that plan. So if there is an emergency, they should have received training already about what to do in response to that emergency. In the unlikely scenario of an emergency, that emergency response has been planned far in advance, and people have been trained on it, so they should be able to respond well to the emergency. General and office safety also has to be addressed. You just want workers to be safe in all aspects of the work, not just the lab work. And they may well have safety manuals in place with a lot of details about the biosafety plan and the chemical hygiene plan. One more slide. All right, so this is my list of regulations. You can see a couple of these might sound familiar. I already talked about the fire department. You've already heard about the Woburn Biomedical Oversight Committee, and I certainly won't read the others to you, but you can see big picture. There's a lot of OSHA regulations. There's some other special state regulations, especially regarding water and disposal of wastes. So it's very important for these companies to be aware of all these regulations, and in fact more. This is not an exhaustive list, but this is some of the most important ones I think that these companies would fall under. Next slide. So that completes my portion of this presentation, but since Josh wasn't able to make it here this evening, I'm going to do my best to show you a little bit about his slides. Safety Partners and DENS do often work together at companies. I like to think of it that my area of expertise, like my slice of the safety pie, is thinking about the regulations and the permits, and also thinking about the people in terms of what kinds of training and behaviors do I need the scientists to have a proper safety program. DENS is more about that operations and maintenance. What support do the scientists need from the building to make sure that everything's going to be safe and properly maintained? So DENS has been dedicated to the life science industry since 2008, and they manage a very impressive square footage of life science buildings and lab space in the greater Boston area. They have supported both GMP manufacturing, like we're talking about, and other biology and chemistry settings. And they provide that facility management and maintenance, as well as lab support services and technical services. And Josh would do a great job if he were here telling you about how many great jobs they are able to generate for people. So I think it is really wonderful for life sciences to foster job creation, not just among scientists, but also in these sort of support roles. Next slide. So what does DENS do? They do facility services, so keeping the facility nice, making sure that the HVAC is attended to, patching and painting the walls, corrective work orders, so fixing things when they are broken, ensuring the grounds look nice and the loading dock is well maintained. They also do things within the lab, glass washing, autoclaving, waste collection and removal, and sometimes even assisting the scientists with experiment prep, things like making media for the scientists. DENS is able to do for them. They also do inspection and testing. So they do weekly testing of the safety systems. There are regulations about testing your fire alarms and fire suppression systems. So they would make sure that companies stay on top of that. And where you have building automation and alarms, those get tested daily. So Josh would also tell you that working in life sciences is a joy for facilities people, because life science buildings get really well built. They have lots of wonderful safety equipment built into them. And so DENS does a great job of keeping that equipment in perfect running order to make sure that the facility is really safe. And then in terms of alarm response, a lot of equipment and systems in these buildings would have 24/7 monitoring. And so DENS would be available to respond if anything went wrong with any of those systems. But just to clarify, these are not alarms that the neighbors would have to hear. These are silent alarms, but they would draw the right support and assistance if anything did go wrong and those alarms were going off. Next slide. So what tools do they use? Equipment, let's just think about how great these facilities are and how they're built for a second. The redundant air systems, power backups, Building automation systems would include engineered sequences of operation and interactive visual control of all building functions. So they just have really good eyes and ears across the building to make sure everything is functioning properly, and they have that great operational control. And then I already mentioned the alarm systems, things like fire alarm, lab equipment alarms in case any lab equipment malfunctions for some reason at any point in the day or night, and building alarms to make sure the building's secure. And I think that is the last slide.
Thank you, Antonia. That was a very comprehensive review of the safety protocols for the types of facilities that we're proposing here.
you.
Just a little bit of, to touch on the economic and employment benefits of our proposal here. Currently, that site in the parcel in question, it's generating about $66,000 of annual real estate taxes for Woburn. We estimate with our tax consultant that depending on the type of use that we end up at the end of the day with, under a flexible scenario, light manufacturing could range anywhere from $1.3 million up to $2.5 million if that were to be a CGMP type of use tenant. Before I go into the next two slides pertaining to Middlesex and Woburn in particular, Massachusetts is the global leader in the life science industry, and it accounts for about 1/3 of the U.S. life science funding. It should be of no surprise that obviously Middlesex County benefits a lot from a lot of that funding, as shown on this bullet point with regards to R&D type jobs and biomanufacturing jobs. Woburn is located about, obviously, as you know, 10 miles away from Cambridge and a lot of the research that's ongoing there. And it's very well situated for the more recent trend in this type of facility. It used to be back in the day, new medicines, if you will, were produced at the laboratory setting, and then the manufacturing would get shipped off far away and or overseas. With the new technologies that are being researched and developed in Cambridge and its surroundings, the researcher really wants to be able to transfer that knowledge, that technology to the production facility. So having the ability to be at the actual production facility within a short amount of time, it's paramount for these types of facilities. Hence what we think Woburn is ideally situated for a facility like this. And obviously, as we indicated, this facility would bring a lot of potential manufacturing and R&D jobs, and it would increase the tax base for Woburn. So with that, I think that concludes our presentation, and we're happy to answer questions.
All right, thank you very much to the team. I would, before opening it up to the public, ask if there are any board members that have any questions for Attorney Tarby or any of his team members. If you could give me a verbal cue, because I can't see all of you.
Oh, this is David.
David, go right ahead.
Okay, first question is, why is the whole 39 acres being included? Why would the hotel and the movie theater be in the this new zone that we're creating? If we're really only using the area on the other side of the building to build these two new buildings, why do we need to? Because what that says to me is that someday they could just tear down the movie theater and the hotel and build more of them. So if you can just help me with that, I'm just curious.
Yeah, they expressed an interest of being part of the overlay district. And by being part of the overlay district, unless you proceed forward under the overlay district and exercise your rights under a special permit, you have to do both of those things. If you don't, then the property remains in its current state and can proceed forward with any developments under the BI zoning district. I think they saw it as, increasing the value of their property.
So they would still have to go through all the procedures of the special permitting and everything else. And all this does is say that you can still do what you're doing, but in the event that you wish to move into another area, it's approved.
Correct.
Okay, so my second question has more to do with the safety side. As you know, Joe, that's what I do for a living.
Yes,
We talked a lot about the cleaning stuff, but my understanding, my reading of pharmaceutical manufacturing is that product is brought in and that product is then processed in a particular way to create the pharmaceuticals. But they didn't talk about that. So I'm wondering, you know, across the street, we have a company that has a lot of liquid gases, frozen tanks over there. And so do you envision us having any of those types of things here? And as we know, the products that are used to make the drugs are themselves sometimes are themselves chemicals. So I would just like to hear a little more about what the storage process is and the gas storage part of it, and if there's going to be frozen gas, you know, frozen liquid hydrogen, liquid whatever type of things. So that's my general question on the safety side.
Doctor, you want to answer that?
I can take a stab at it. So this was a little bit of a challenge for me because there is some variation in biomedical manufacturing in terms of what companies might make, what their raw materials would be, what the final product would be. So I think it is very likely that there would be other chemicals involved, but the vast volume of chemicals, really the biggest contributor to this categorization of hazardous chemicals, is the cleaning products. That is pretty common, pretty commonly the case.
Well-
I would say it is pretty common also to have at least some compressed gases or cryogenic liquids, liquid nitrogen, that kind of thing. It would depend on what was being manufactured.
I understand that.
Yeah.
It's just in a general sense.
Yeah.
And I don't want to dispute you with this, but the elements of the manufacturing are not always benign.
Mhm.
And they in and of themselves can be hazardous, or if incorrectly handled or stored, unsafe. So
Yeah.
I realize you don't know exactly who's coming in here to do this, but my concern is that whatever is developed here is developed with the understanding that safety is the most important thing in the city of Woburn. We
Mhm.
do have a history of having a past where some of the manufacturers who existed here before were not very concerned about that. And we ended up with some bad stuff left in the ground. And I know that's not the world we have today, but I just want to be sure that every effort is made to that these facilities have for their bringing in and bringing out and storage the safest methods in the world.
Absolutely. No, that's a very good point. And I think that it is important to acknowledge the history, that it is those terrible things that have happened in the past that give us the safety understanding and the safety regulations that protect us now. So that is very important. A lot of the things that I said about the chemical hygiene program apply to these materials that you're talking about as well. Compressed gases, there's storage rules about those, and they would be part of a hazard communication plan to educate the employees. They should always be stored, strapped to a wall so that they're not a hazard. They're not in danger of being knocked over and having a release, which again would most likely be very confined to the immediate area, but could be dangerous to the people in that area. Even very benign gases, right? They're just under a lot of pressure when they're in those gas cylinders. So they have to be strapped to the wall and properly stored. They can't be rolled down a hallway where someone might lose control over them. Cryogenics, the liquid nitrogen, the very cold materials, you need to wear extra protection if you're one of the scientists accessing those materials and using them, wearing gloves, usually a face shield also for extra protection. And since some of those are asphyxiation hazards, if they were to be leaking into the room, it's also very common to put oxygen sensors in areas if you are storing significant cryogens or compressed gases in a confined area. So those are some of the safety things that would be in place. Definitely the education and of course the storage.
And so the emergency operation plans,
Mhm.
I write them, so I know there is a piece
Yeah.
about extracting air from a facility in the event of some sort of a emergency.
Mhm.
I just want to make sure that we are entirely in compliance so that there is nothing that's escaping. You're not, you showed a nice buffer, but those are houses and families and people and my neighbors that are over there. And I know you're in the area, but these are the things that the citizens who live up the street are concerned about.
Yeah. So some of those would be the sort of engineering controls that DENS has a little more oversight over than I do, but making sure that the air patterns mean that nothing is escaping from areas where biological hazards may be in use, so that they're always at negative pressure to other parts of the facility. That would have to be taken into account as well.
Okay, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay.
Madam Chair, Mike Cantaloupe, who's the Chief Development Officer for Davis, would like to add a few more comments to Dave's questions.
Sure, go right ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to maybe dial back out from the comments that Dr. Puglisi was making. We expect to go through a very rigorous process if we're lucky enough to get this zoning envelope approved. We next move obviously to a special permit where you'll have an opportunity to evaluate the building that we're proposing, its mechanical systems, its security procedures at what we like to call a base building level. And then once the tenant is identified, Dr. Puglisi, correct me if I'm wrong, then that specific use goes through all the permitting filters that were listed on her slide that had, it must have been on the order of 15 different permits that involve not only city, state, local fire department review, and that particular lens is then focused on what the tenant is actually doing. So I just wanted to make sure that that we fully expect that to happen once we identify a tenant for the building.
All right, thank you.
Thank
So Dave is all set. Is there any other board member who has a question for any one of the presenters tonight?
Chair, Claudia.
Sure, Jim, go right ahead.
So heard a lot about the personal protection of the employees. I didn't hear anything about the neighbors. Of questions of how that's going to be dealt with. I understand there was a neighborhood meeting or neighborhood meetings. And there's a couple of questions I have that go with that also. But on the proposal, like Dave touched upon, so cinemas go away, the hotel go away at some point. Now we have a completely enveloped life science park with one access in and out, Middlesex Canal Park Drive, which is immediately off 128 at a controlled intersection with a fire department station. We already have traffic issues in the evening there. And the density of such a development being completely surrounded other than on the 128 side by residential is concerning. The concerns that I had about effluent on the earlier proposal, I didn't hear addressed tonight. And now that you're talking about the hotel being part of this complex, And the elevation of the houses adjacent to it on the Main Street side are probably 15 feet higher in elevation than what it is on the Lowell Street side. So the effluent doesn't, depending on the wind direction, is not gonna travel that well, being 35 feet above the roof line. I have serious concerns about this. I think everyone should really look at this. This is not a one-lot subdivision. This is an entire area, the Showcase Cinemas, hotel, and their adjoining parking lot that is being redeveloped. It's a major impact, surrounded by residential. The other thing that was brought up is the wetland concerns. As it stands now, as I recall, when the Showcase Cinemas expanded their facilities, they were in control of the mitigation and the maintenance of the wetlands, because it was a big problem with flooding. They were lucky to get it passed when they did. So the maintenance of it would be something that the whole city department could jump in and have them get going on, whether or not this proposal goes forward. I do have a lot more concerns about this. I'd like to hear a whole lot more from your environmental side and how you can control the airflow on your effluent. And for Attorney Tarbee, I'd like to find out what neighborhoods were contacted in regards to this. Was it just the Ellen Road area? Or was it Lyman Street? Or was it the Main Street, Fisher Terrace, all the adjoining neighborhoods on the Main Street side? I'm curious.
We contacted everyone that would be contacted under a special permit proposal. We did not take the abutters list from the vacant parking lot. We took it from the boundary that you saw on the plan in red. We took it from the hotel lot to the vacant parking lot, out 300 feet.
Thank you.
And Jim, just to make one comment, and we'll get you some responses on your questions, but this is the same land that was included in the original LBOD. The hotel didn't just decide to join, or the cinema didn't just decide to join. We actually eliminated the lot below, which is unbuildable anyway, but that was part of the original LBOD. So I just wanted to make sure you were aware of that.
I am. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, Joe, do you have any other responses to that before I call for public comment?
A couple quick things.
Certainly, go right ahead.
I'll try to be quick, sorry. So you're absolutely right. I have talked a lot about employee safety, and to some extent that's me coming to it from the perspective that since the employees are the ones immediately present, anything that's going to impact neighbors would have to get past the employees first. So if we are heading off a problem before it has any chance of getting beyond the boundaries of the building, then that's a good first step. And keeping things safe within the building, keep things safe outside of the building. You mentioned effluent a couple of times. If you're talking about like discharge, what water discharge there's going to be, I would say that that's mostly regulated by the MWRA, the Massachusetts Water Resource Authority, and just you would need a permit in order to discharge anything down these sinks, and there would be very specific rules about what was and wasn't allowed. So you may already know that, but I just thought I would mention it.
Okay, great, thank you. If there are no further comments by board members, and if there are, feel free to give me a verbal cue because I cannot see all of you. Hearing none, I would open this up to public comment. So if you are in the audience and you wish to speak on this proposal, please use the raise hand function that Tina will explain to you now.
So please hover your cursor over the bottom of your computer screen. You'll see a button that says reactions. And when you click on that, there's a button inside that says raised hand. If you click on that, I'll be able to tell that you'd like to address the board, and the chair will call on you. I am scrolling through the audience now and double checking. And I do not see anyone. I'm sorry, I do. I see Ms. Tocci. Do you see that, Madam
I
Chairman?
do. The screen name is C Tachi, so excuse me if I said
Yes.
that wrong, but I will call on you. Please state your name and address for the record and any comments you would like to make to us. You are muted, ma'am.
I don't even see a microphone symbol.
Oh, no, oh, gosh. I'm sorry, we can't hear you. I see that you're talking.
If you'd like, there is someone else. Oh, there you go. Oh, you had it for a moment. It's gone again. There you go. Can you unmute now? No.
No, I'll tell you what, I'm gonna call on the other person and see if you can, fix the audio, because we'd love to hear from you. All right, the other hand I see is Lynn Blanchard. Lynn, if you would like to unmute yourself and state your name and address for the record and give us your comments. Thank you.
Okay, this is Lynn Blanchard. I live at 10 Wyman Street. Is that volume okay?
It is, Lynn. Thank you.
Okay. I just want to say these things because this is a different board. I've been to the city council meetings and the neighborhood meetings. I am not a direct abutter. I'm very concerned about the safety of this proposition. No one has mentioned the school tonight. There are 367 students very close to this. And while I understand that we are living in a different time than we were in the 80s when we had the water issue that killed 12 children, there is still possibility of accidents and errors that could affect the surrounding people. And although I think that all the applicants are very sincere in their proposals and their safety measures, we don't really know what's safe and what isn't. I gave a couple of examples the other night. However, I will add one to that, and that is baby powder. Who didn't have baby powder when they were young? And now we know it causes ovarian cancer. So why we would even consider putting this anywhere near a neighborhood or school or the daycare center on the corner is beyond me. The extra tax income is not worth threatening lives. I guess that's all I have to say. I'm appalled. And I think it's not fair to people that, we've all bought these properties knowing what the zoning was around us. And now you just change it because it's more income for Woburn. Not right. It's just not right. If I were a young parent living in this part of Woburn, I would be gone in a heartbeat. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. So let's go back to Ms. Tachi. Let's see if the audio situation has been fixed. Oh, I am so sorry that we can't hear you.
Well, maybe this might be helpful, if you don't mind, Madam Chairman, just so that the folks in the audience know. My recommendation to the board, which they will have to consider and decide whether they adopt, but my recommendation is going to be that the public hearing be continued from tonight to the next board meeting on September 13th. We have 2 members of the board who were unable to make the meeting tonight. And it's my understanding and my expectation that both of them will review the tape of this meeting and will attend on September 13th and be able to participate in the public hearing and the eventual discussion and deliberation on a recommendation. Both of those members were fairly active and vocal during the first round of the rezoning request that didn't go forward. So my recommendation will be, even though you may not be able to speak tonight, or you may have something you didn't speak at all, there will, if the board adopts that, the hearing would continue on the 13th.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. Is there any other member of the audience that would like to speak? I see a hand raised, and that is Mr. Joe Flaherty. Please state your name and address for the record, and we would love to hear your comments.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, Joe Flaherty, 17 Boyd Road. I've been attending a handful of these public meetings on this development, and I just want to say I feel that Davis has shown a capability to listen to the concerns of the neighbors that have been at all these meetings. They've been nimble and accommodating to those concerns. They've made a lot of effort to listen to the community and change the criteria and the design to better suit the area. Basically, this development design has come a long way, and I appreciate that, as I think a lot of the neighbors have as well. So I'm in support of this project. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments. All right, is there another member or members of the audience that would like to address comments to the board today? If you could use the raise hand function or otherwise indicate that you would like to speak.
I see none, Madam Chairman.
Okay, all right. So at this point, I understand the planning board director has a recommendation to continue because we've already heard that, but Tina, why don't you make a formal recommendation to the board?
I would recommend that you continue the public hearing on this rezoning petition to your meeting on September 13th, 2022 at 7 p.m.
All right, and we will make a decision prior to the end of this meeting whether that meeting will be held virtually or whether we will be in person. So we have a recommendation. Would any member like to make a motion or continue discussion? I'm up for a motion either way. I am hearing silence.
Claudia, I
David.
make a motion that we
Claudia.
continue this to the next meeting.
All right, there is a motion
Second.
by Dave. Jim. A
Second.
second by Jim. Is there any further discussion on the motion to continue? Hearing none, I would ask Karen for a roll call vote on the motion to continue until September 13th, 2022 at 7 p.m.
Jim Callahan,
Aye.
Kevin Donovan,
Aye.
David Edmonds,
Aye.
Carolyn Turner,
Aye.
Chair Claudia Bogan.
Aye. That is 5 in favor, none opposed. That motion carries. We will take this matter up again on September 13th at 7 p.m. Thank you very much to the audience members and to the petitioners and presenters.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And may I just add to, Madam Chairman, for those in the audience, if you don't hang on the meeting this evening all the way to the end for the discussion, you're welcome to contact the office in the meantime after the meeting, and we'll let you know whether it's in person or virtual. Best way to do that is by email. You can find us on the city website. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next on the agenda under subdivisions, Baker Way definitive expiration of construction completion date, and the petitioner is David Baker.
Yes, Madam Chairman, this was actually mentioned at the last meeting. The board, as you will recall, approved a minor modification to allow the elimination of a grass strip. There's still a little bit of work to be done, submission of as-built, perhaps some satisfaction of DPW requirements for the trench in Washington Street. And also, as we discovered, the potential need for a further modification to cover an additional portion of grass strip. They've asked for an extension of the completion date to the end of October, believing that that will provide sufficient time for them to accomplish all of those things. So staff is supportive and would recommend the board consider extending the completion date for Baker Way to October 30th as requested.
All right, does any board member have any questions or comments? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to accept the director's recommendation to extend the completion date to October 30th, 2022.
Excellent. A motion has been made by Carolyn. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Kevin. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, I would ask Karen for a roll call vote, please.
Jim Callahan,
Aye.
Kevin Donovan,
Aye.
David Edmonds,
Aye.
Carolyn Turner,
Aye.
Chair Claudia Bogan.
Aye, that is 5 in favor, none opposed. That motion carries. All right, next on the agenda is the Planning Board Director update.
Yes, so just in the way of updates, I will tell you that the next upcoming meeting on September 13th has a full schedule. In addition to the continued hearings on 216 New Boston, 225 Merrimack, and the LBOT proposal, you will have discussion of the acceptance, hopefully, of an as-built plan for Legacy Lane and potentially a release of surety to close out that project. Sherman Terrace, the completion date is up on August 30th, and there have been some recent issues regarding the site and some activities on the property from abutters, which will likely come up. Crossman Road, we're due for an update on a land court A&R process, a detailed timeline for any work that's not part of the subdivision, and a discussion regarding engineering's earlier comments that the surety might be in danger of being not enough to cover the remaining work. We'll do some work on that between now and the next meeting. Lastly, the board will be in line to discuss the Highview Estates. The completion date for that expires at the end of September, but the board voted to put it on the 13th to allow for 2 conversations before that date occurs.
All right. So that is on our agenda for September 13th. Perhaps now is an appropriate time for the board to look at the agenda and to consider whether a virtual meeting would be more appropriate or an in-person meeting would be more appropriate. Does anyone have any discussion on that? Jim?
Chair? Yes, Claudia, I'd like to propose that we have an in-person meeting on September 13th.
All right, Jim, I happen to agree with you. I think that that is a lot. And there's various constituencies that would be interested in attending. And with regard to some of the constituents that were here, some of the audience members that were here and were unable to navigate the technology for the LBOD, giving them an opportunity for an in-person meeting might make some sense. So does anyone else have any thoughts on that? I don't believe we'd need a formal motion, but I would like to sort of just get a yay or a nay for the 5 of us that are here.
Yay.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
So we will post that as an in-person meeting for September 13th, Tina.
Good, and we'll also make sure to let our 2 other members know as soon as possible that the meeting will be in person so they can plan accordingly.
Excellent. All right. So next I see open space and recreation plan update, Tina.
Yes, I'm sorry. I've got a frog that I can't get rid of. We are in the process, just the early stages, but we will be updating our open space and recreation plan over the next several months. An open space and recreation plan is a great idea in its own right. It gets you in a process where you hear from residents and others about what the needs for recreation and open space ideas, stimulates the conversation, gets the city to prioritize and list the kinds of things it would like to do in the next plan. Typically covers 7 years. And the bonus is that if you have one open space plan that's been approved by the state, you're also eligible for certain grants for open space and recreation activities that you otherwise would not be eligible for. So they're a great idea. The recreation department is going to take the lead on this one. The last time we did it in conjunction with the master plan update and the hazard mitigation plan update. But of course, we don't have those to deal with this year. So we'll do a standalone open space update led by the recreation department, but planning will assist, and we'll keep you guys informed, certainly of any public meetings that will be coming up, but also any milestones that we reach along the way. In the end, the plan has to be presented to the planning board for review and approval. You did that last time, and we're hopeful that we'll give you a plan. You can do it again a second time.
Excellent. Thank you. And then next we come to the MBTA communities and the housing choice law.
Yes, so the final guidelines were finally issued. You might recall there was a number of robust discussions about the city council and at planning board meetings earlier this year when draft guidelines were issued by the Department of Housing and Community Development. A lot of communities submitted written comments, and they considered those over the summer. And I guess about 10 or 14 days ago, issued the final guidelines. I have not gone through in detail to summarize or list all of the differences, but I have gone through and skimmed it and can tell you that I see nothing that would have changed the opinion, certainly of the city councilors, in terms of their earlier decision not to try to pursue conformance with the law. It's just, there were some tweaks to the law, but none of them were meaningful enough to have changed the mind of Woburn. So I will endeavor, though, to get you and the city council, the solicitor and I would like to get you a summary of what those changes were and what the final regulations say. So we hope to do that maybe between now and September 13th.
All right.
Can
And
I
you
just
know,
add something?
yep, Dave, go
Um,
ahead.
When I read through it, the only big change I saw was they took the communities with bus routes only out of it. And that allowed some of the smaller communities that are only have bus routes running through them to get out of it. But as far as the rest of it goes, it looks like we have exactly what we had before. And,
Pretty much,
yeah.
pretty much.
And it's terrible because we said this the last time, and I'm just revisiting old arguments. It doesn't take into consideration all the work that this city has done over the last decades to increase affordable housing. And it doesn't even consider it. And it's shameful. It's, you know how I feel. I love my government, but sometimes they overstep, and I think this is a case of overstepping, but that's just my opinion.
All right, Dave, thank you. When you and the city solicitor are getting together for us a summary of what the law requires, it might also be useful to make us understand what non-compliance means, what sorts of grants and things, like you just mentioned a grant for the recreation situation. It does non-compliance with the law disallow us from that grant, for example? You know, what the actual consequences are for us not complying, us being the city of Woburn not complying with the law. That would be useful just to know on an ongoing basis. As planners, we should know what we shouldn't be planning on if indeed it comes to pass that Woburn as a whole decides that it's not going to comply.
In part, we'll be able to do that very specifically. And then interestingly enough, the way the wording works in the RIG guidelines, it actually leaves the door open for other grants not specified right now to either disqualify you if you are in non-compliance or give you no points in a point scoring system in a competitive grant application. But thank you for the comment. We'll make sure to include some of that in our response.
Excellent, thank you. All right, so if that is there any other component to the update, Tina?
No.
All right, next I'll go to approval of minutes. We have draft minutes from the July 26th, 2022 meeting. If members have reviewed them, I think if all of us were here, I believe, for the 26th meeting. And so,
Yes. It was
okay.
just Bob that was absent. Everyone else was there.
Excellent. Thank you, Karen. So if members have read those minutes, if you have any comments or changes or a motion to approve them.
Motion to approve.
All right, a motion to approve the July 26, 2022 minutes as submitted by Dave. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Carolyn. Any other discussion? Hearing none, I would ask Karen for a roll call vote, please.
Jim Callahan,
Aye.
Kevin Donovan, David Edmonds,
Aye.
Carolyn Turner,
Aye.
and Chair Claudia Bogan.
Aye, that is 5 in favor, none opposed. That motion carries. Those minutes are adopted. Are there any other business matters that may legally come before the board not known at the time of posting?
No.
All right, that being said, would a board member like to make a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Dave. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Kevin. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I would ask Karen for a roll call vote, please.
Jim Callahan,
Aye.
Kevin Donovan,
Aye.
Dave Edmonds,
Aye.
Carolyn Turner,
Aye.
and Chair Claudia Bogan.
Aye. 5 in favor, none opposed. That motion carries. The meeting stands adjourned at 8:29 p.m. As
Thank you.
always, thank you very much, Tina. Thank you very much, Karen. We will see each other again next month at an in-person meeting on the 13th.
Have a safe
Reflection.
holiday.
Indeed, a safe
you.
holiday to everyone. Okay,
Thank
bye-bye.